Welcome to session 7 of the Iowa Ideas Conference. I'm your moderator, Marissa Payne. This session, Barriers to Homeownership, is within the Community Development and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion tracks. The process to purchase a home is complex, so we will talk about what are the greatest challenges to ensure access to resources, education, and support for all who want to make this investment in homeownership. Thank you to the DEI track sponsor, Inclusive ICR. Please join me for a quick message from our sponsor.
Hi friends, Angelica Veneta, co-chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in Eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to check out our website at inclusivicr.org for upcoming events and our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
So our time together will include talking with our panelists and addressing audience questions. All of our sessions have closed captioning access and all of our sessions are being recorded. Please, audience members, if you have a question, feel free to share it as soon as possible. And once we get down to the final few minutes, there won't be as much time left. So I want to be sure to incorporate as many of your questions as possible. So with that, I will let the panelists introduce myself. I'll just go who I see on my screen first. Karey, we'll start with you.
Hi, well, thank you for having me. I am Karey Chase. I'm the Vice President of Community Impact with United Way of East Central Iowa. Our United Way is a 5-county United Way. We have Cedar, Jones, Lynn, Benton, and Iowa counties. And I am here not as definitely as a expert in housing, but have done some work in the last few years in discovery around housing, especially home ownership. So thank you.
Thanks. Stephanie.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Murphy, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm the Executive Director of Neighborhood Finance Corporation. We're a nonprofit mortgage lender that serves Cedar Rapids and Polk County in Iowa. And we build homes in Polk County. And I'll talk more about our work as we go through the question and answers today. Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah.
I am Sarah Thompson. I am the Director of Rural Development for Iowa City Area Development Group. I am also on the Governor's Empower Rural Iowa Invest Task Force, and housing is one of our tasks for the task force.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you all for being with us today. So to start off, let's just kind of establish, what are some of the barriers to homeownership that people are facing in Iowa? Sarah, you can get us started on that one. I know you have some thoughts.
I kind of put together a list of what I saw as a lot of barriers. Many of them are like housing's not available. The supply chain is making it harder to get houses built currently. Starter homes aren't the ones being built. We need more starter homes, I think. Interest rates are going up. Sometimes downtown reinvestment hasn't happened. There's some opportunity for upper story housing that communities could take advantage of. And then just, sometimes people don't speak the language, they don't speak English, but maybe they don't even speak the language of, mortgage and lending. And so there's a lot of terms in there that people need to learn to successfully buy a home.
Thanks. Did anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay, well, I was just I think that's right on. Exactly. I mean, the national data, the local data, I know Karey has some of the local, some of the national, I think we're 3.8 million homes short of where we need to be in this country. And we know that in the affordable first-time home buyer market, that's even greater, like the disparity is even more. And that as prices rise in the housing and the cost of housing with interest rate rising, those households that are most impacted are minority households. And the fear is that it's only going to increase the homeownership gap between white and minority households.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's some of the discovery that we have found, not that I shouldn't say we have found has existed, but really are tuned into as a community, is the disparities around homeownership, specifically in Lane County, looking at there being over 50% gap between white and Black homeownership, and that just continues to trend with other ethnicities as well. One of the things that United Way worked in collaboration with other partners around, specifically Lane County Public Health, was to do some focus groups. And I think that was very impactful because looking at data tells us a lot, but hearing lived experience and hearing two consistent themes come up, which one was redlining still existing, and aftermath with redlining continuing, and then just education around home ownership, how to buy a home. I think what we know is that we have a lot of great resources. We're just missing the bill on connecting and educating around the process. And it's a big process. It's not an easy thing sometimes to have to go through.
Yeah, so in your roles, what are you all seeing as the need that's out there? And, you know, we know there's not enough housing stock available, but what is that actually looking like on the ground? Karey, perhaps you can start off with, you know, some of the needs assessments that have been done after the derecho.
Yeah, so I think what we learned obviously was no surprise, and that is that we have a not very strong housing stock. We have not only limited housing rentals, but also homes available to purchase. Derecho really impacted that, and then when you compound that with a lot of the economic issues that we see currently, it's just has really progressed. I think where we what we have done then is post derecho, as a community led by Lane County, have formed the Alliance of Equitable Housing, and through that work in the last almost 2 years have really narrowed down the biggest issues when it comes to housing, and that is lots and lots of time of talking to lots and lots of people, and knowing that we need more affordable housing stock is one of the biggest things. That's really easy. The second that was identified was that there are a lot of barriers to renters and homeowners, and inclusive to that was also individuals experiencing homelessness. And actually what we are seeing is that there are some defaults on some mortgages that are happening right now because of those increased costs, which then, you know, if you continue around that pathway, lead to individuals doubling up, experiencing homelessness, those kinds of things. The third was, we all know that there was a lack of affordable housing, but we really hadn't taken stock into safe housing and quality housing. And I think Sarah will probably get into this as more as we talk into the rural areas where you see a lot of the older homes. We see that a lot as well in Lane County and specifically Cedar Rapids. And that just goes to, it could be energy efficiency, it could be your windows, your furnace, it could be mold. We are seeing continued issues with homeowners and mold after not great jobs done post derecho. And then the one thing that just lives through all of these areas is equity, because we continue to see inequities around every step of the way when it comes to housing in our communities.
Yeah, I would just really build off that. I think so much of the work that we see as a lender when we're looking at trying to increase minority homeownership specifically is those long-term effects from redlining and that historical of not having access to generational wealth and what a difference that makes. And that really shows up in credit scores, because if you don't have that safety net, there's one thing I always think about being poor or low income when you're just starting out or in school, but you still probably have, a lot of folks have a safety net if they have generational wealth. But if your family hasn't experienced that wealth building through homeownership, there's just not that safety net. And so we see lower credit scores historically, more medical debt and the ability to pay that down, and then the higher use of alternative credit like payday loans. And those are sort of some of the barriers that we're seeing in addition to the other things that we're talking about.
So in the rural communities, a lot of what we see is, they want to have housing come in, but they don't necessarily have the land to do it. A lot of farmland is around these communities, and farmers don't always want to give up their land to build more houses, right? And so that is an issue. But then even if they have the land, finding a developer is hard. Not a lot of developers want to come to rural communities when they can do a big project in, Iowa City or Des Moines or Ankeny, something like that. But then if you even get to those two things, so a lot of times if there aren't amenities in the community, if the downtown doesn't have any retail or there's no grocery store in town or other things like that, that is also another reason that developers don't want to come and build houses in your rural community. So there's that challenge. There's also the challenge of, in our rural communities, a lot of times there'll be just one person living in a home, and usually that's a single older woman who's, 80 years old, still living at home, doesn't want to go to the nursing home or anything. And then nobody knows, what that house is like. Does it need updating on the inside? And so just a lot of challenges with keeping the stock that they have updated and getting developers to come in.
Yeah, so I mean, if, owning a home is kind of the American dream. So how do we get to this point of, not everyone being able to access this dream of home ownership and struggling to afford it? And what are the roles of both like the public and private sectors in kind of where we're at today? I'll open that to anyone.
Go ahead.
I can kind of jump in. I think that especially for the rural communities, a lot of them just don't know what they can do and what they can't do. And so, educating themselves on how they get a developer to come in and what kinds of things, programs are helpful to have people, buy houses, rent houses, that kind of thing.
I think that there's two things. There's the supply side, and then there's the personal, empowering people, providing them the information. On the supply side, zoning, I think, has a big impact. We see that in the communities where we work because it's much more cost effective to build homes in a subdivision where you're putting up similar homes all at the same time than to do infill new construction. But a lot of times the lot size requirements or other requirements of that development make it so that you can't build a home that's accessible to a first-time home buyer. And then to do infill construction, that's because that's expensive, more difficult work. You have smaller lot sizes, so you need to get variances, things like that. And I would say that communities have made some progress on that, but the zoning that really drives up the cost when you're building one house in one neighborhood and another house in another neighborhood. If we can build two houses together, we're so excited at the same time and can really see some cost savings from that. And since a lot of that work is done by nonprofits, There's the capacity issue. You know, programs come out and they last for a year or two. Well, how do you build up long-term capacity when you know that money's going to run out in a couple of years? So I'll put a plug in for the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. If anyone has any pull with that's been in the works with the federal government for quite a while, but it would provide some long-term consistent financing or tax credits to do this work, to renovate homes and build new homes. And I'm just sort of checking through my list. I think another thing that I think about is that sometimes as nonprofits, we're asked to do extras that a for-profit, like, why don't you try out the ADU, or doing a green home build, all good things, or doing higher energy efficiency. And those are all great things, but that means that we have to raise additional grant monies just to build that house. And that's harder to bring to scale. So I think we need to think about those things and how we're going to bring the kind of homes that we need built to scale in our communities.
And I'll just add to that, if that's okay. I think I'm going to bring it back to when Stephanie talked about generational wealth. And I think that's a huge thing. I think that education component is huge, but I also think that when we look at the inequities in poverty and wealth and in our community, you also have to have the funds to be able to purchase a house. And it's a commitment. It's a consistent commitment. And when you look at how we have a lot of gaps in those two things, that's a lot of work that has to be done. If we look at just building up those, I guess you have to peel back the layers of it, because home ownership is a result, but there's a lot of years and decades, centuries of issues that have to come undone that are going to lead us to this. The other thing that I just wanted to share is that I thought of this the other day when we were kind of preparing for this, when we were doing our focus groups. We did a few with the NAACP, which invited different members, but we also did a focus group with YPN, and they had their first-time mothers group. And it was very interesting. In the NAA discussion, there was a lot. Housing came out as the #1 issue that was discussed. It was very clear. They were very clear about the path that needs to take. Home ownership did not even come up in the YPN discussion group. So when we're looking at first-time moms, a lot of them in the class were single moms. That wasn't even a pipeline dream to think about. They were very just focused on rental. And so just getting back to that generational on how to break that cycle of that generational wealth and how we build that.
Marissa, is it okay if I just add one thing to that?
Yeah.
I just wanted to share about our program, and we've seen some, early success in it. We have a program called Journey to Home Ownership, and it's some money that we raised. We have $1 million in down payment resources, and right now we're just working with African-American households. We hope to expand it to all minorities as we raise additional funds. But so for the past about 9 months, we've been very intentional about holding Journey to Home Ownership, it's called, and you can look on Neighborhood Finance's website for information. But they're not at home buyer education classes. We still encourage people to get that 8 hours of home buyer education, but they're a 2-hour event or class that is a safe space for African-American households that have not had, this generational wealth, that want to learn about the home ownership experience, to just talk about issues. So like the YPN group might be a group that it would be at. We're currently recruiting ambassadors so that we're not providing those classes, but we have a staff member that's trained in doing that. But that other organizations that are already working with communities of color can provide those. So, but what we've seen is we have a long ways to go. So I'm not telling you that we've met the end, but our lending to African-American households was always around somewhere between 7 to 5%. of our total lending. And in the first 7 months of this year, we broke 10% and we're at 11% of our lending. So just that intention has had an impact, and we're really excited about that and to see where that goes. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. So I mean, as a result of these kind of longstanding inequities and issues, what are, what does this really mean for all Iowans? Of course, some are able to access home ownership, but how does this affect the state as a whole, that like not everyone who wants to own a home is able to? What does that mean also for the rental market, and what sort of ripple effect does that have on renters and other populations?
Yeah, so I can start that one if you want me to. So I think what we are already seeing is it's the supply and demand issue. When you don't have enough housing, it's going to cause that ripple effect where you do have increased costs, and we're seeing that a lot right now in rentals specifically. So during the last few years, we've had a lot going on. What we saw was there was a lot of demand for rental units, which means that there was opportunity to increase cost. And we also now are seeing a lot of renters who are unable to afford the rental unit that they may have. Waypoint for Linn County right now is the entry point for any housing issue, and they are receiving about 1,000 calls a day for housing assistance. So that's a huge issue. And so I just look at how's it going to impact if we don't. I think we see that on a range from housing where you have a high level, more expensive housing, and you're wanting to bring in different talent into the community, and we're not able to have the housing stock for that, all the way down, like just to be able to have that affordable housing. And I think what you see is kind of that whack-a-mole where the problem just keeps moving around, and we're not seeing a great solution. My other big plug is that we say affordable housing a lot. And this is where I just think we have to think very holistically, which I had talked before, is that we just cannot continue to try to build more affordable housing. We have to do that in conjunction with helping individuals increase their economic mobility as well, and the barriers that they have. I think Stephanie did a great job of lifting up, like credit scores are essential. We're never going to be able to budget somebody out of poverty per se. We are really going to have to look at the under and unemployed and be able to help be able to get that vision of home ownership under control. And I think that's one of the things that we are lacking, and that we are currently working on, is that we just don't have a broad financial literacy. We have some, and we have some great things. But when we're seeing 1,000 calls a day for housing assistance, that is just on the rental that doesn't even include home ownership per se, then we have some bigger issues that I think we need to address.
I would say too that the ripple effect is you can't bring in workforce if there's no housing for the workforce to come into. So then you can't maybe get a manufacturer to come outside your community and bring 300 jobs, because there's no homes for them to live in. I've noticed too in the rural communities, sometimes if there are houses, other people will buy them and make them like Airbnbs and things like that, instead of offering them affordably to people who could actually use them. And so it's a double-edged sword for me, because in rural communities sometimes the Airbnb is the only place that they could have someone stay in their community, right? So it takes the place of a hotel, but at the same time it takes away a home that someone could be living in year-round.
So Neighborhood Finance is a renovation lender, just to speak to that point, and sort of not that we're going to solve the Airbnb problem or landlords buying houses and not fixing them up, but we are an alternative where people can purchase a home and renovate it all in one loan, and then there's forgivable loan money in there. And we have thought about like how that could work in rural communities. So if there's someone on here that wants to have that conversation, I won't go into it, but what partners exist. And I know I spoke at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and that was the topic. So reach out to me if you have questions on that. But yeah, nationally, I feel like I am fortunate to be part of a larger national organization, NeighborWorks America, and I've been going for a decade to conferences and hearing about other communities. And it's like that crisis is now arisen here. And when we give the national statistics, it's the problem that we're experiencing. I mean, one is this just takes your breath away, is that not that things were bad before the pandemic, but like post-pandemic, looking at 2022, there are 4 million households that were expected to become homeowners that now won't be able to because of rising prices and interest rates. And it's not that we have the rental units for them to be in. It's like, this is the problem.
The other thing I just want to add is I've been in a couple conversations about our new Iowans, our immigrant refugee, and just the different type of housing as well to be a homeowner. I mean, I think that there is a need that I've heard from this population that they need larger multifamily, to be able to have multifamily members to be able to basically to live how they want to live, to be in the housing that they would prefer. So I think that there's also the need to look through all of our community and understand exactly, and that goes for our aging population too. What does that look like for that aging population? And maybe they're not living in that rural town in that large home, but they still want to be a homeowner. Do we have different options to be able to provide for that?
And I'd like to elaborate on something that Karey mentioned like a few minutes ago. I mean, a lot of state level programs to address affordable housing deal with, tax credits and offering incentives to developers to build more housing or to reinvest in our existing housing stock. But like the point that you made was about, there's some uplifting we need to do to improve individuals, their socioeconomic status and their financial mobility. So what are some like tangible steps that you'd have in mind to help us get there?
That's the golden question, I think, right there. Yeah, actually there's a few things, and I think these will impact home ownership overall. But I think where we see a connection specifically is we have a rent utility collaborative that has all of the rental and utility nonprofits, city, county, that provide assistance, that we have created this one point of entry where you again call Waypoint and they're able to kind of work through from beginning to end. I won't go into it. We knew that this was a need because we saw a lot of funding coming down from the state and the federal level that needed to be flushed out and needed to get out to the people that were going to need it. We also knew there was going to be a time that came where this Band-Aid was not going to last forever. We're not going to be able to have the assistance that was coming in. And we've hit that point. The email actually went out from Waypoint this week that our nonprofits are out of funds. So we are back to pre-pandemic, where again, when we're experiencing 1,000 calls on housing a day and there is no funds, we have to start thinking differently on what that is. So I think there's a couple tangible things, but one of the ideas that we're working on right now is that we do have the Opportunity Center, which is located in Ladd Library, and that is to be able to help people on their workforce journey. And so what we have from the Rent Utility Collaborative is data, which we've never had before. So we actually have great data on renters, who is calling, where they're calling from, Are they under, unemployed, et cetera? So we have this great network to be able to now take housing and shift it into workforce pipeline. So that's some of the things that we're working on. The other thing is we really just have to figure out how to help people get connected to the resources that exist effectively. So I think those are the two big things, is just being able to do that. And I think we have to do that by really by discovery, really talking to people and really starting to understand what are the issues to access, so we can be proactive in addressing them.
I would say too, I think down payment assistance shouldn't be overlooked as a resource. Consistent down payment assistance that doesn't go away. We've had the experience of having 3 large down payment grants that have come through here, and the money went very fast. But during that time, we expanded homeownership opportunity pretty dramatically, especially to communities of color. So where our minority lending usually is around 15%, during those times we had it went as high as 35%. And so I think that that's something to look at, because by having that down payment, lenders are willing to take more risk if their loan is less of the, so that can allow that family to become the first family that starts to build wealth and build up. Because when I say the lower credit scores and things, it's not because I believe that it's not because of, it's because of the system. It's not because of the individual. I strongly believe that it is the systems that we put in place, the discriminatory housing policy that we've had. And so the more folks we can get into positive homeownership experiences, that's a tool to turn it around. But they have to be good loans that people can afford in houses that don't have a lot of deferred maintenance. So they're not having to deal with a roof 6 months after buying the house. Thanks.
I'll say another thing that Stephanie made me think of is just we had in Linn County, the African American Museum had a redlining exhibit, and it is just the education to the community that is huge. And what I have seen is some actual movement from our realtors and our lenders to be able to discuss this issue and to move forward, because we still see lending practices that are not great, and we still see realtors that don't have great practice well that continues to perpetuate redlining in our community. So I am glad that there has been some recognition on both those parts and some movement.
I agree. The Iowa Association of Realtors, with their diversity and inclusion group, has really taken this issue head on, and they had a really good event where they sort of level set and acknowledged past issues that we all sort of just took for, I mean, I just think of my growing up years, that and they acknowledged it and are setting the path forward. So I'm very hopeful by that. One other thing, if I can just throw it in, and then Sarah, I'll let you go, is homebuyer education, I think, is so important. And I think if we look to Minnesota, they have such a great history of both the realtors and lenders really encouraging that before people start buying a house, looking for a house, because that gives people a chance to be prepared when they make that offer, to have all the information. And we feel like if we can get people into that education and sort of address some things prior to applying, it's a much better experience, because no one likes to hear no. That's deflating. No, so we always try to do that not now discussion. And here's a few things that can change.
I don't have a whole lot to add. I was going to say, everybody should be aware of down payment assistance programs in their communities and their counties. And then there could be, I think, more education to the people who already have homes about the people that need homes. so that if they do find a home that they can move into, they have friendly neighbors that are welcoming to them instead of, not making them feel like their new home is their home, right? And so I think just more education on all sides so that everybody feels like they are coming to a community when they buy a home. I think that's important.
Yeah, that kind of segues into a question that I had, which was, if people take homeownership on before they're ready, it could end up being more of a financial drain for them, than something that sets them up for generational wealth and, achieving the American dream. So how do we make sure that people are, in a position where they're ready for homeownership and they're able, to take that on? What sort of education do they need to be successful? And, is there anything we're missing currently, or, what are some of the promising programs that are out there?
So I'll go first here. I totally agree. It's not just your payment, your mortgage payment, right? There is costs, like you need to buy a mower, you need maybe a snow blower, you need to keep your property up, you need to make sure the roof stays nice and your heating bills aren't too much to overcome. So I think one, there needs to be education for anyone buying a home for the first time, especially on what all of the other costs will be involved. So they make sure that they have, enough money coming in to cover all of those things. And then also just a broader knowledge of what programs are available in each community or each county or even region to help them if they buy a house and then realize that the heating bill was way higher than they thought it was going to be, and maybe they need help a couple months out of the winter or something like that. Just making sure that maybe realtors give a sheet that has, these are your resources that you can call here or go online here and find things out when you don't really know what you need to find out. Who are the people that can help you?
Yeah, I think as lenders, we're required to print off the HUD approved housing counseling agencies. And it's one more piece of paper that people get during the home buying process, but those are really good resources. Horizons is in the Cedar Rapids area. They're our education partner, and they provide great programming. I think the funding for that programming is always limited. And, I see the organizations that provide that work do a lot with not much, but the more that we can have like consistent classes always offered, and just as I said earlier, for that just to be the mojo of the community, that I'm a first-time home buyer. My first stop is to go to an 8-hour, whether it's online or in-person home buyer education class, and talk with a housing coach or to sort of set myself up for success. So I think that that's one thing, and I have completely forgot my other thing. So I'm going to pass it over to Karey, and hopefully it'll come back to me.
Oh, geez. I don't know if I have a whole lot left to add. I think that's I think that has to be our next move, is figuring out what are the things that we're missing. And I think it is just talking to those groups that we're not seeing home ownership from, and really starting to get a grasp on the why.
Thank you. Reminded me. I had two things real quick. There is this out of Portland, there's a consultant. It was a neighbors organization that sort of started it, of doing culturally specific homebuyer education. So basically it's Spanish speaking, and everybody in the room has a Latinx background, African-American, and it addresses the cultural issues around homeownership and redlining, maybe things like that. So I think there's hope in that. They've had really good outcomes there. Also, Convergence is a program that the Mortgage Bankers Association has done in a few cities. I don't think we're all going to get a convergence. We've asked them for it in our markets, and I don't see that happening, but they are helping us some and it's a website and a resource where all the players come together. and share their information in a way to make it accessible to home buyers. So home buyers aren't having to call 3 different counseling agencies and all the figuring out, navigating the down payment resources. So I think that the more that we can come together as communities and lift each other up and put it all in one space, the better off we'll be.
And we do have an audience question I want to fit in here. As we're looking at ways to address the, accessibility of home ownership, how can we look at updating older housing stock as part of that solution? So, addressing lead or other environmental issues, what can we do there?
There's a lot of, like the Main Street program is for economic development, and there's other programs too that are nonprofits, right? I would love to see some sort of nonprofit group that could form in any community that would maybe go and help people who, elderly that still live in their homes that need light bulbs changed or need new switches or whatever. But while they're in there, can kind of take a look at, what are the issues that this house has, and then find ways to help that person overcome those issues. If there's mold or if there's leaky windows or that kind of thing. Just getting more grassroots, rural, stick-to-itiveness, these groups together to be helpful. But then also you feel more neighborly when you've been in someone's home and they're welcoming. And so I think there's a lot that we could do, but we would need to kind of figure out how that would work and start getting groups together in your communities.
Yeah, and there's programs out there. I mean, our program, that's what we do. So but we're in a smaller geographic area, but we receive funding every year from the city of Cedar Rapids to provide up to a $15,000 forgivable loan, along with lending money, so that people can either purchase and renovate a home, which allows them to find maybe that more affordable home because it needs a new roof or a furnace or it's completely outdated. Or if they are already living in the home and they need to get it, they need to make repairs or renovations to stay in that home, whether it's an age in place or just deferred maintenance or things that they want to do to make that home fit their growing family. We do a lot of those. So, and like I said earlier, I'm happy to talk to maybe other smaller communities, how they could pull together partners to make it happen in their community. So I think it's all bringing stuff to scale. That's it. Like, we know what works, but how do we make it work even more? Like, how do we do more of it and because we don't have the big marketing budget. So people sort of need to find us through opportunities like this. Our number one referral is friends and family.
I think one of specifically when we're looking at our smaller rural cities, we have found that the key to all the information lies within the city clerks. They know everything. They know what's going on with every home, what's the issue, and they are a great resource. And so that's where we have really, when we were doing the continued to do the patch program, which the NFFC is partnering with, which is the providing assistance to community homeowners for derecho assistance for issues that affected your home. We utilize those city clerks to be able to share that information and to gather information. We heard issues that some homeowners had. I don't know the technical term for it, but whatever the box is that's on outside your house that connects to your electricity, like that's something that always needs to be updated. Well, not always. It has to be updated at some point, and that's a real cost burden sometimes for homeowners. And so I think just understanding that, understanding from the Alliance of Equitable Housing standard that there are different issues when we look at more urban and rural, and where we can have different solutions. And that's why we have that separate group that's really working on that quality housing and what are some of the solutions to that. I know that that's the one where specifically there hasn't been a whole lot of movement on like coming up with like what are we going to do next. But I do know, in addition to kind of some of what Stephanie has said, the Housing Trust Fund also does some grants to be able to do that. But again, I think it always goes to just finding and being able to point, because sometimes when you're in the middle of that too, it's just when you're in the middle of a crisis or when you're in the middle of all like feeling overwhelmed, you're not the best problem solver. And so if we can make a pathway that's a little bit easier for some of these work, I think that's what's going to be very helpful in the long run.
Yeah, well, I know we have just about 15 minutes left here, so we'll begin to wind down a little bit. But, looking forward, what are, any models from Iowa or elsewhere around the country that kind of show like what an ideal picture of homeownership being accessible could look like, and what's the impact of those examples you're aware of, and how could we get there in Iowa? This could be either like programs or city or state endeavors that come to mind for you all.
I already mentioned the National Homes Investment Act. I think that has real promise. I'm excited about what's going to come out of the Inflation Reduction Act money and money to do energy efficiency and energy savings work for a lot of that money specifically to go to low and moderate income households and communities, both rural and urban. So I'm excited about what that might happen, because if we can reduce people's energy costs, that's reducing their overall housing costs. If anyone wants to be inspired, about probably 3 weeks ago, CBS Sunday Morning did a story on the Nehemiah project. I would encourage you to watch that and dream of how we can do that in our community. Providing housing, and it came up through Black churches and the community, and it's spread throughout the country, that model. So I think those are some models. We have a lot of good things going on here. I'm also excited to see what happens around housing with the disaster recovery money coming out as well. I think that will provide some opportunities.
This isn't a program so much as maybe we need to look at our zoning, accessory dwellings, granny pods in your backyard, more space set aside for maybe tiny homes or smaller cottages, which would be more starter homes. Or, if you're getting to retirement age, you don't need the big 4-bedroom home anymore. Where can we, move those people out so that their home can be opened up to young families? Programs like that, I think, maybe building even more retirement villages, that kind of thing will help open up housing stock.
Yeah, and I really don't have much more to share on that. I just love the idea of not looking at an idea because it's not something we've ever done before. So I think we just have to move forward, keeping our eyes and ears wide open and being willing to really look at every option that's available.
I'll add to that, 3D printed homes are coming sooner rather than later, I think. And I don't know that they're going to be any cheaper than the homes that are stick built, but that will be an option to maybe put homes in quicker, because it won't take as long to build those 3D printed homes. And so that's going to be something that, not everybody's going to be good with, but for those people who are willing to, try something new, that might be an option.
Yeah, and since there was some discussion of the just the disaster recovery assistance and other like pandemic related assistance out there. I mean, we know, especially in Lynn County, after the derecho, just the housing need that's here, but also between ARPA and then some of the federal assistance that'll come to Lynn County, over 45 million, I believe, and through the Community Development Block Grant disaster recovery funding. You know, we have opportunities with that funding or with all the COVID relief from ARPA and other sources. There's, you know, even though some of that pandemic assistance is drying up, that's also presented an opportunity to, you know, think differently about the resources that we have out there. So what opportunities and bright spots have you seen for using this funding to improve outreach to people in need and also to create new resources to address accessibility of homeownership?
Well, I can tell you, we did receive an ARPA award from the city of Cedar Rapids. So Neighborhood Finance will be launching an energy improvement. We're calling it Energy Advantage for low and moderate income communities and it's within the city of Cedar Rapids. And it's building off of what I was saying with the Inflation Reduction Act money. Hopefully we'll get more money to do that. But we're sort of looking at this, any pandemic relief money that we're receiving is how do we continue to recycle it instead of just put it out once. And so we will be doing that as a deferred loan so people won't have a payment, but at some point we'll get that money back. We also I don't want to just talk about what we're doing, but it's like what I know best. We hope to launch a 0% construction loan for a nonprofit and developers that are doing like infill construction and partner with the disaster recovery money so that we can lower that cost even more to allow that maybe that then those builders can do some energy work to lower the long-term payment to the household. So we're just trying to figure out how to fit all the puzzles pieces together to really move it forward. But Eastern Iowa is so great about that. People come together, they work, they have discussions. So we are very fortunate to be in a community where that's happening.